Hi, my name is Kara Hamley O'Donnell, and I'm the Historic Preservation Planner for the City of Cleveland Heights. I'm going to talk a little bit about Marian Morton, and as you all know, she has a book about Lakeview Cemetery out. And Marian is Professor of History at John Carroll. She is a former Landmark Commission member. She was very integral when we were planning this renovation of the structure. And she is on the the Citizens Advisory Council at the City of Cleveland Heights, and one of my favorite speakers and one of my favorite writers, and I'd like to introduce you to her, and we'll learn more about Lakeview Cemetery and its Cleveland Heights connections.
Thank you, Kara, as always. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks, Cleveland Heights Historical Society, for seconding Kara's invitation. I want to thank also Lakeview Cemetery for lending me many of the photographs you're going to see, not this one. I took that one. Who said to turn the projector on? And also, speaking of Lakeview Cemetery, Laura Roberts Dempsey is here from Lakeview, and you will also see some of her wonderful, wonderful photographs as well. Laura helped me not only with the photographs, but with finding many of the grave sites, some of which you will see tonight. When I was writing the book on Cleveland Heights and the book on Lakeview, and thank you, Jane, as always, for coming and being my agent. When I was writing those two books, I noticed that there were a lot of connections between the two places. And those connections actually became even clearer when I started another book on Cleveland Heights, and I noticed that a lot of the early developers of the suburb were also at Lakeview. I said, well, this is interesting. So Kara said I could do a talk on it, and so here I am. I imagine that everybody in this room has been to Lakeview Cemetery. Am I right? Am I yeah. Yes? Yes? Okay. I didn't see anything happening, so I said yes. So I don't think you're going to learn anything new about the cemetery. But what I think that you might learn that's new is how many close connections there are between the two places, because that's what I learned. Now, on the surface, of course, Lakeview Cemetery and Cleveland Heights are very different. For example, when you think about Cleveland Heights, you might think about this strip mall. Among other things, you recognize this is our beloved Walmart up at Severance Town Center. In some ways, the Walmart does represent some aspects of the city to us, large parking lots, traffic jams, commerce where you wish it weren't. So in some ways, Walmart represents Cleveland Heights for us, especially if you live where I live and you can see it out your back window. When you think of Lakeview Cemetery, on the other hand, you think of the beauty, the serenity, the manicured lawn and landscape, and beautiful monuments such as this one. So at first glance, the two places look, in fact, very different. But let's look again, and let's see what those two places have in common. Well, first of all, despite the remarkable dissimilarities in appearance, the cemetery and the shopping center of Cleveland Heights share a location. Both of them are on the 4th Glacial Terrace south of Lake Erie. So they are close to one another. Second of all, the second similarity, or second connection, is that this, of course, or if you don't know, this is the Severance family monument in all its elegance and beauty. And as you also know, the Walmart is located in Severance Town Center. So second connection is this, that some of the same people who lived in Cleveland Heights now live at Lakeview Cemetery. The commonalities or connections between Lakeview and Cleveland Heights stem from their almost simultaneous origins, their shared purpose, and especially their geographic proximity. So let me talk briefly about the origins and purposes of the cemetery and the suburb. Lakeview is known as a garden or rural cemetery. Garden or rural cemeteries were founded in the 19th century outside of rapidly industrializing areas. As the terms garden and rural suggest, these cemeteries were meant to be a retreat back to nature and an escape from smoky, congested city streets and neighborhoods. This belief that nature could restore the soul and heal the body is, of course, characteristic of 19th century romantics, that's capital R. For example, landscape painters like Thomas Cole, nature poets like William Cullen Bryant, or think, for example, of Henry David Thoreau retreating back to nature at Walden Pond. The earliest and best known of these garden cemeteries is Mount Auburn in Boston, founded in 1831. The closest garden cemetery to Cleveland is Spring Grove in Cincinnati, founded in 1845, from which Lakeview would borrow its first landscape designer. Lakeview was founded in 1869 in East Cleveland Township by philanthropist and civic activist Jephthah Wade and a group of like-minded businessmen. They believed a garden cemetery would not only provide city dwellers with a retreat back to nature, but would also express their own pride in the city and in the nation. They chose Lakeview's site because of its dramatic natural landscape. 225 acres of hills and ravines, as you know if you have been there. At its highest point, some 200 feet above Lake Erie, there's a splendid view of the lake, hence the term or the name Lakeview. Not incidentally, several of Lakeview's first board of trustees, including Wade himself, owned property nearby and hoped that the park-like cemetery would raise their property values. In 1873, Lakeview trustees described the cemetery thus: the beautiful undulating surface of the grounds, the superior soil, timber, stone, water, etc., make it susceptible of the highest development in ornamentation. We'll see some of that ornamentation later. The trustees hoped that this beautiful landscape would attract what they called the best citizens of Cleveland. But the cemetery was a very distant 6 miles from Cleveland's public square, and it was difficult to get there until the electric streetcar ran east on Euclid Avenue in the 1880s. And Lakeview trustees had trouble initially selling plots. And I think it's useful to remember that the trustees of Lakeview were selling, and in fact still are selling, real estate. One of the ways to look at a cemetery is a real estate transaction. The origins and intentions of Cleveland Heights are quite similar. Also originally part of East Cleveland Township, Cleveland Heights became an independent hamlet in 1901. A piece of the cemetery was within the new hamlet's boundaries, and I have very dramatically colored that yellow for you on the slide, the map of Lakeview. The rest of the cemetery was in the new village of East Cleveland, established in 1895, and in the Little Italy neighborhood, which had been annexed by the city of Cleveland in 1892. Cleveland Heights residents had also gone into real estate. They had discovered that there was greater profit in selling and developing their property than there was in farming it. we will meet some of those developers in a minute. The presence of Lakeview, in fact, encouraged the growth of suburban Cleveland Heights. The first streetcar up the hill into Cleveland Heights stopped at the Mayfield Road gates of the cemetery in 1890, and from there went east on Mayfield and encouraged residential development as it went. Another specific connection between the suburb and the cemetery is this one. According to local legend, anyway, developer Patrick Calhoun was inspired to create his Euclid Heights allotment by the view from Lakeview's Garfield Monument. That's a legend. And I read that in Kara's thesis, so maybe that's true. Developers' descriptions of Cleveland Heights' new neighborhoods echo those of the cemetery. Here's Patrick Calhoun talking about his Euclid Heights allotment. Upon the crest of a lofty height away from the noise and dirt of the city. And here's a 1909 advertisement for the first Forest Hill development of Grant Deming, which is roughly Hyde Park to the east of Lee Road and streets roughly between Cedar and Euclid Heights Boulevard, west of Lee. Anyway, here goes Deming. The development's high elevation, pure healthful air, commanding view, luxuriant shade, boulevards and grassy plots make an atmosphere of simplicity and quiet elegance not to be found elsewhere. The map locating his allotment shows Garfield's monument close by, which is a little bit of a stretch. But obviously Garfield Monument, proximity to Garfield Monument is considered good advertising. Like the Lakeview trustees, these developers hope to sell their property to the best citizens of Cleveland. Okay, shared beginnings then, shared origins, similar intentions. The shared goal of the suburb and the cemetery of providing an escape from urban life and of course their geographic proximity create, believe it or not, a similar landscape. As I mentioned, the suburb and the cemetery are on the 4th Glacial Terrace south of Lake Erie. The names of both the suburb and the cemetery were deliberately chosen to evoke that height above the city of Cleveland. Ta-da. Okay. Here's a wonderful 1907 postcard showing the view from the top of the monument of the city of Cleveland. And what is wonderful about that is the sort of undeveloped skyline that you see in 1907. But certainly the lake is in view. Much earlier, 1874 atlas, and it shows the Haycock's home. Haycock's was a big property owner here and later a developer. And his house, I think, was about at Superior and Lee. I'm not positive. But if you look at the middle frame of the middle set, you will see that it says a view of the lake from the house. And there's, as you know, there's still places in Cleveland Heights where you can see the view if you really look hard. The original glaciers left behind, again, very similar landscape, innumerable streams and ravines. Yeah, and this is a wonderful photograph taken by my grandson James, who helped me with the photographs, and we'll see a picture of James later. But in any case, this is 2003, and you catch here the drama of that natural landscape, even though the cemetery is 130 plus years old by then. Although a challenge to the 19th century farmer, the streams and ravines added picturesque charms to the suburb, at least as far as the developers were concerned. This is a 1911 photograph of, it says North Boulevard, we would say it's North Park Boulevard. This is Ambler Park. I think it's that same ravine that runs down between Fair Hill and North Park Boulevard. But these are, this is considered good advertising. You sell people houses near there. After all, they don't have to plow the ground or anything. So it's a great it's very picturesque, very dramatic, very charming. It's the kind of stuff that sells cemetery plots and suburban plots as well. Second similarity. Although the founders of both the suburb and the cemetery admired nature, they believed you could always improve on it. Hence, no sooner do they find this beautiful landscape than they try to enhance it and ornament it. For example, the curved paths that are so characteristic of the cemetery are efforts to enhance the natural beauty of the landscape. And if you've ever tried to find your way around Lakeview, you say, where the heck am I here? Anyway, that's deliberate. You're not supposed to be able to find your way around. Because the second inspiration for the curved pathways is to differentiate the garden cemetery and the suburb from the grid of a city street or the grid plan of earlier cemeteries such as this one. Garden cemeteries, in fact, became the first urban parks. After the streetcar reached the Mayfield Road gate and after the building of the Garfield Monument in 1890, Lakeview became a very popular Sunday gathering place. And this is actually not 1890, this is 1881, and I chose it because it was interesting. It is an artist's rendering of the first entombment place or structure of James Garfield. And he rested there from 1881 until 1890 when the Garfield Monument was completed. But you want to notice here the curving paths and the sort of picturesque landscape that I suspect the artist took a few liberties with, and what the heck, why not? Garden cemeteries also became the model for urban parks in Cleveland and elsewhere. Garden cemeteries and parks were developed simultaneously, sometimes by the same people. Examples of these urban parks are Wade Park, a very nice picture, Rockefeller Park, we'll see in a minute, and Gordon Park. And those were all donated to the city by Lakeview trustees and who are buried at Lakeview. And this is 1888. That is the first Cleveland Zoo, as you probably know in the distance there. And here is Rockefeller Park. This is donated to the city of Cleveland by John D. in 1896 at the occasion of the city's centennial. And notice again the curving roadway that runs along Dome Brook. And the lower image is Wade Park also. And this lovely lady likes nature, but she didn't want to get that close to it, especially not in the costume that she is wearing. The design of cemeteries and urban parks also influenced the shape of suburbs like Cleveland Heights. And sometimes the connections are, again, very direct. Landscape designer E.W. Bowditch laid out some of the curving pathways in Lakeview. And almost simultaneously, Bowditch designed not only Cleveland's park system, but seen in Rockefeller Park that we just looked at, but Bowditch designed also the curving streets of Calhoun's Euclid Heights allotment. And I hope I have this on. I have in my purse I have this neat pointer that one of my students gave me, and it was my first chance to use it, and never mind. Anyway, if you look, you see the, oh, cool, thank you. Is that mine? Okay. If you look, you see, particularly in the flossier neighborhoods, that sort of curved street pattern, and this is an imitation of the park, and here's the waterway and so forth. So it's a good example of the suburb imitating the cemetery, so to speak. Other of the suburban streets also have this lovely, graceful, curved line. This is Belmar, and you don't have to live in a fancy suburban area to have these pretty curved streets. This is Belmar, and down in North Coventry, which you probably know. Another very direct connection is A.D. Taylor. A.D. Taylor worked for Lakeview intermittently throughout the 1930s when the cemetery could afford him. And he redesigned the lake behind the Wade Chapel, and he created the elegant Mayfield Road gates for the cemetery, which you are familiar with. During the 1920s, as you probably already know, A.D. Taylor had designed Cumberland Park for Cleveland Heights. And then in the 1930s, and this is Cumberland, we're looking north, or I think I have the slide reversed. Anyway, Laura lives up there somewhere. Yeah. Notice, yeah, I do have it reversed. Notice the curving pathways again, very characteristic of parks, cemeteries, and fancy suburban places as well. Taylor also designed Forest Hill Park, as you know, and here again, notice the use of water and the curving pathways and the plantings, which are characteristic of cemetery design. And this is Forest Hill Park, the pond at Forest Hill, and you probably recognize that. If paths and streets were curved, however, creators of cemetery and suburbs believe that there should be uniformity in the layout of the built structures. And here's, I mean, there's no such thing as a bad photograph of Lakeview, is there? But this is a particularly splendid fall photograph. And notice the curved pathways, but notice also that the built structures have to line up one with another. You find the same kind of uniform setback on suburban streets, a setback here on Shannon Road, for example, mandated by the zoning code. Artful plantings, as we have seen, were also considered essential to enhancing the beauties of nature in a garden cemetery and in a suburb. Lakeview is especially known for its flowering trees. And here's Wade Chapel, and this is one of Laura's wonderful photographs. And here is Daffodil Hill. Again, this is Laura's image. And in the amongst the daffodils here is a piece of sculpture from that wonderful Celebration of the Spirit exhibit that I hope you all saw. Aerial photograph of Severance Estate and its neighboring streets, including mine, is in there somewhere. And I want to show it to you to emphasize again how important artful planting, particularly trees, are in a planned suburb such as our own.
How close to Taylor and Mayfield was the Severance home? Where was that?
Where's that thing? I just did it. It's there. Here. See, this is why I asked for a point. There it is. Way back there. Way back there. And we'll see the gardens in a minute, I think. Okay. Cemetery and suburb creators also thought that man-made bodies of water enhanced the beauties of nature. And this is Lakeview. We don't know exactly the date, nor can anybody locate exactly which body of water this is, and partly that is because this is a stereopticon, and you have a double vision of the beautiful. One of the beautiful lakes is either Wade Lake or it's Dempsey Lake. Am I right? Yeah. We have, of course, in Cleveland Heights, our own man-made bodies of water. And those are the Shaker Lakes. They are, of course, made by the Shakers, but the Van Sweringens capitalized on them when they came to plan their first suburban development, which is called Shaker Heights, but is really in Cleveland Heights. Although it seems odd, occasionally domestic architecture resembles the architecture of the cemetery. This, of course, is Lakeview's signature sculpture, the Garfield Monument. And notice the dramatic use of stone that suggests affluence and permanence. And call me crazy, but I always thought that this house looked a lot like the Garfield Monument. You can see the Garfield from here. And anybody, does it say? Okay, which house is it? Anybody recognize it? Brown. Yeah, it's John Hartner's Brown house. And you can see the monument from here. I always thought, that's odd, but they look kind of alike. I mean, it is not. They're about the same period. They're about 1890s. So there's some reason for that. Lakeview, of course, is very well known for its classical statuary. This is the John Hay memorial or statue. John Hay was Secretary of State under McKinley. He married a local girl, Amethyst Stone's daughter, so that's why he is buried here and has this magnificent monument dedicated to his memory. The classical style that you find in a lot of monuments was characteristic of monuments of the early 20th century and was probably inspired, at least in part, by the White City at the Columbian Exposition of 1893. You also know, of course, that the downtown buildings that comprise Cleveland's group plan are also done in the classical style. This is a favorite monument of mine. It's, I think, the most dramatic monument in the cemetery. It is a monument of the Peck family. And what is striking about it, it was done by Joseph Carabelli, who did dozens and dozens of the most stunning of Lakeview's monuments. And what is so unusual about this is that it is life-size, that it is not up on a pedestal. And these figures stand on the ground, and you can look right at their faces. And they're striking for their realism, because most classical statuary is not really intended to be any particular person. And these seem very personal to me. Except for the neoclassical columns on colonial homes, this style did not catch on, classical style in private homes, but it does appear occasionally in gardens, such as this one. This is John Severn's garden at Longwood. So the two, the suburb and the cemetery, resemble one another in really kind of interesting ways. The cemetery and the suburb also have many residents in common, because it was customary, of course, to bury a loved one where family members could visit. Probably thousands of Cleveland Heights residents are buried at Lakeview, but I have chosen to include here only a few of the suburb's early developers. Some of the very first residents and developers of Cleveland Heights, the Coyams family, the Marian Miner family, and the Haycox family, whose home we saw already, are buried in East Cleveland Cemetery. East Cleveland Cemetery back in the news, as it has been on and off for decades probably. This is a township cemetery founded in 1849. It became the responsibility of Cleveland Heights and East Cleveland to maintain. Neither city did a very good job, and the cemetery has been periodically very much neglected. This is 1900 here. Nice. And Lakeview now, I think, has assumed responsibility for the cemetery. Is that right, Laura? Yeah. Okay, so if you haven't been down to this cemetery, it's right across Euclid Avenue from Lakeview. cemeteries, well worth looking at. Anyway, some developers are buried here. Others are buried at Lakeview. I have decided to omit the obvious candidates here. John D. Rockefeller, everybody knows that. His monument, you know, his development, heck with him. The Van Sweringens are also buried at Lakeview, heck with them. And I've decided to include, instead of those well-known people, some familiar names, but names that are probably less famous than those. For example, here is the Pryor family monument, the family plot of Elmo Pryor, founder of the Lakeview Wine Farm, on the site of what is now Cumberland Park. Like other early residents, Pryor discovered that developing his property was more lucrative than raising grapes on it. And in fact, Pryor had plans to develop the park that appear in a 1914 plat map. And here's Pryor in Hampshire, the intersection which you recognize. We're going down into the park there. On the 1914 map, this road, which is now called Pryor, was called Alvin for some reason. And Pryor had also laid out a street which he called Brunswick that was intended to run right through the middle of the park. The Brunswick was never developed because the city bought the property from Pryor, and no homes were ever built on this mythical Brunswick. But there were built some homes on Pryor. This is one of them here. Is that your house? No? Next door, okay. Okay. So there are a few houses built already in 1914, and at the end of the street, at the Mayfield end of the street, was the Cleveland Heights Presbyterian Church, which subsequently moved across Mayfield into Forest Hill and is now Forest Hill Presbyterian Church. So Pryor, a name you know, kind of. Oh, here's another name you know. This is the Compton family plot, and this is my neighbor, Kay Heilman. I said, Kay, you know, I don't have very many pictures of people in here, so come and pose on the Compton family plot. And so she did. She didn't say I had to take it out either, so it's in here. Compton, Charles Compton was a large property owner in East Cleveland Township, and although he didn't live to see it happen, Compton Road was named after him. And this is my street, and this is Kay's Street. And we're looking south on Compton, and that's the brick home, Kay's brick home, and by the way, that's for sale. And I am getting a commission if anybody in this room buys it, and I'm not kidding either. This home was also the home of Mayor Frank C. Kane, and Mayor Kane is also buried at Lakeview. Huh? Oh, did you? In Texas. Yeah. Oh, his first house. Oh, right. Oh, yeah. I know where you live. Yeah. Yeah. His first house right over here. Yeah. This is the family plot of the Seth Minor. Of the Seth Miners, Marian Minor family is buried over in East Cleveland. This is Seth Minor's home. This family owned property west of Taylor Road and south of Mayfield that became known as Minor Heights. That is Altamont, Beechwood, Berkeley, and DeSoto Roads, Minor Heights. Right next door to the Seth Minor family is this plot owned by the Minor Taylor family. One of Seth Minor's daughters, Blanche, married Seth Taylor, whose family owned the property along Taylor Road that was later developed by John D. Rockefeller as the Forest Hill allotment. And those of you who are genealogists will recognize how important and how much fun it is to go to the cemetery, because you can figure out families from the cemetery, who's buried with whom. Only this short road, Minor Park, bears the name, bears the Minor family name, and this is Minor Park at Hyde Park, both Grant Deming developments. But Blanche Road and Andisdale Roads are named after Seth Minor's daughters, Blanche, and Andisdale is apparently one of his daughter's married names. In this very unassuming plot are buried Dr. Nathan Ambler, his wife, and their adopted son, Dan Caswell, the developers of Ambler Park, now Chestnut Hills. Neighborhood developed in the 1910s and 1920s, now in the National Register. And this is a postcard of Ambler's home, which everybody says is where the Baldwin Reservoir is, and I don't know any different, so I'm going to say it too. Yeah, when I started this, I thought, well, maybe where people are buried are similar to where they live, but no, it didn't happen for me, I'm sorry to say. Now, an exception might be this monument, which is the plot of Dr. Worthy's street tour. Note the giant Dugway Dam in the background. Streeter was an early Lakeview trustee. He lived on Euclid Avenue, but he owned the property that was later developed by Calhoun as Euclid Heights allotment. Oh, darn it. This is the, if you stand upside down or hold a mirror in front of yourself, you will see that this is the burial site of William Lowe Rice. Rice occasionally credited with being the real brains behind the Calhoun development. Rice, as you know, was murdered in 1910, and his killer has never been found. Okay, and this is the entrance to Euclid Heights allotment. We're at the corner of Euclid Heights and overlook, and note the curving street laid out by Bowditch. Okay, here in lie Marcus M. Brown, his wife, and his son. Brown was a developer of the area we now call Mayfield Heights, between Coventry, Superior, Euclid Heights Boulevard, and Mayfield. This is, Brown initiated the development, and we think in about 1898, and this is a photograph of his own home, taken about 1900 at Wilton and Euclid Heights. By 1907, Brown's development was already in financial difficulty, and his home was for sale cheap, is what he said in the ad. Cheap for $25,000. The ad claimed that it cost $33,000 to build, and I believe it. He was selling the house to pay back money that he had borrowed from the Cleveland Trust Company. In 1909, Brown died, but before he died, he had a chance to lay out streets of Radnor, Wilton, Cadwell, and this is a wonderful picture. It's a picture of wonderful Wilton. It's not a wonderful picture, but it gives you an idea of the wide variety of architectural styles of the first decade of the 20th century. This is the plot of George Washington Penty. Penty was a developer with the Shaker Heights subdivision, which developed during the 1910s and 1920s. The Royal Streets, Queenston, Kingston, Princeton, in the area once known as Idlewood, and developed as well East Fairfax, Bradford, and Monmouth.
What was his name again?
Penty, P-E-N-T-Y. And here's the Penty home on Fairmont Boulevard. In 1874, the Pentys owned about 75 acres along what is now Fairmont. And just to the east of the Pentys lived the Hecker family, and the Heckers are buried quite close to the Pentys in Lakeview as well. Once a neighbor, always a neighbor. Why not? You gotta be careful who you spend eternity with. And here's the wonderful Severance Monument that I began with. Most of us are familiar with John Severance as the owner of that fabulous estate or the benefactor of the Art Museum. And of course, he was both of those things. And the benefactor, of course, of Severance Hall. But like other early residents, Severance also developed the property near his home, property that he had bought from the Marian miner family. This is part of the Severn allotment, which includes Severn, Shannon, we saw Shannon and Bendemeer. Wade Monument, which we recognize immediately as the burial place of the founder of the cemetery, but also buried at the Wade Monument are Wade's son and his grandson, Jephthah Wade Jr. Like Severance, Wade Jr. is known best as a philanthropist and a benefactor of the arts, but he was also a real estate developer, developing first the Wade Park neighborhood at University Circle, and also developing, I think in the early 20s, South Overlook in Delaware, in Cleveland Heights, and this is a photograph of Delaware Drive, developed by Jephthah Wade Jr. And finally, Lakeview and Cleveland Heights are connected not only by their past, but by their present. This is one of Laura's photographs, just a knockout, if I do say so myself. And what it represents is this, that despite the founders' intentions to escape the city, they couldn't do it. The city has come closer and closer to Lakeview, closer and closer to Cleveland Heights, and in fact has moved into the rural settings. First the streetcar and then the automobile made the cemetery and the suburb more accessible. With that accessibility came a wider diversity of class, religious, and ethnic backgrounds by necessity. And this is illustrated by the in-migration to both the cemetery and the suburb of two very significant groups, Jews and African Americans. The first Jewish incursion into Cleveland Heights is actually Mayfield Cemetery, founded in 1887 next door to Lakeview, as you know, not long after the founding of Lakeview Cemetery. The cemetery was followed by other Jewish institutions along the Mayfield Road corridor, including the Montefiore home, and across the street, the magnificent Temple on the Heights. Nevertheless, despite the existence of a Jewish cemetery next door, there are Jewish sections in Lakeview, such as this one, which is set aside for members of suburban temple Kol Ami. This section contains many splendid monuments, including this one, designed by John Scarabelli. John Scarabelli firm is a descendant of the original Scarabelli sculptor and monument firm. Anyway, Mike Johns told me what this sculpture is, otherwise I would have no idea because he designed it. The three bronze birds at the top of the monument represent the Goldstein's three sons, and the birds were created by sculptor William McVeigh. The tops of the stone curve inward toward each other, symbolizing the couple's closeness to each other. Absolutely stunning, stunning piece of work. The second very significant in migration, of course, is to both the cemetery and the suburb, is of African Americans. African Americans are buried throughout Lakeview, although Section 50 is almost entirely black and set aside in 1960 for African Americans. They don't like to be reminded of that, but there it is. What is interesting also about this headstone is that it represents a new trend, and the newest trend, I think, in monuments. That is the photo engraving on the surface of the monument of the folks who are buried here and remembered very poignantly, if simply, by their family who created this for them. Cleveland Heights also has experienced the influx of African Americans, and we're well aware of that. And this is a photograph that I actually took at a Memorial Day parade a few years ago. It is of the Monticello marching band. Lakeview is actually probably more ethnically diverse than is Cleveland Heights, and that diversity is displayed in the monuments which bear the names and remembrances in their native tongue. Both Lakeview and Cleveland Heights have tried hard to attract and maintain their populations as the city moves closer and folks move farther and farther east and south. Both the city and the cemetery work hard to maintain their infrastructure. Nobody's getting any younger. This is a slide at Lakeview, a sign at Lakeview that warns people not to step on the stone balcony because it is weakened. And this is a photograph of Minor Heights, a good example of Cleveland Heights' aging housing stock. Nevertheless, just as Lakeview's founders had hoped, the cemetery remains a lively place for the living. Lakeview serves its neighbors as a park, a place where urban folks can be refreshed and consoled by the beauties of their surroundings. Thousands and thousands of people from around the world and from Cleveland Heights come to the cemetery. This is my grandson. When he was a little boy, and he learned to use this camera at Lakeview, and that came in very handy last summer when we put this book together. People come from around the world to look at it. It's such a beautiful place. And when they come, they make the cemetery their own. They add personal touches to the monuments. And I took this photograph years before I thought of doing this book, and I thought, my goodness gracious, or something like that. How in heaven's name, this is a very tall monument, how did those dark glasses get up there? And ladies, yeah. Cleveland Heights residents also participate in Lakeview's many public events. Many of you probably saw the splendid outdoor sculpture exhibit, Celebration of the Spirit, a couple of summers ago. This is a new event for Lakeview. It is American Heroes Day, and it is designed to commemorate those emergency services who rallied heroically after 9/11, and Cleveland Heights firemen and policemen and emergency vehicle people are here in this wonderful parade. Oh, who are these people? Community leaders also spoke at this event. I didn't hear them, but I'm sure they were great. And these represent, of course, the three cities that Lakeview is in. Now this I hope, I wish I had heard. Also at American Heroes Day, the Coventry School Children's Choir standing on the steps of the Garfield Monument. Lakeview, of course, encourages visitors and, of course, hopes that many will return in the future and stay forever. Everybody has to laugh at cemeteries. I don't know. So as this concluding slide shows, the future of the suburb and the future of the cemetery, like their past and their present, will be connected. Thank you.
Question number one. Talk into the microphone so we get tired.
If the cemetery started in 1869, how far out on Euclid Avenue did the streetcars go at that time? Because I had understood that after the streetcar approached Lakeview Cemetery, the caskets were unloaded onto horse-drawn hearses and taken into the cemetery. Is that true or not, or does anybody know?
Is it true that the caskets were taken by the hearse, by horses into the cemetery? Yeah.
I don't know how far out the...
Oh, prior to the streetcar? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know how far out the Euclid streetcar came in 1869.
Oh, I didn't go that far. There's no streetcar till 1880 something. I know that.
There were no streetcars till 1880?
Not that far east, no.
Well, how far did it go?
That I don't know.
And so you don't know if they were then offloaded from the streetcar onto the hearse?
No.
Thank you.
Don't know. Yeah, Jean.
Do you know anything about Euclid Heights Boulevard here? How long it's been in existence? Who put that monument or that stone in front of the corner house that spells Euclid wrong?
The monument in front of the Marcus Brown house? Is that what you're asking me? Jean,
The corner house on Euclid Heights and Superior. The corner house on Euclid Heights and Superior. There, at the entrance, the street entrance, there are two
right.
blocks, and it gives the address of Euclid Heights Boulevard, and it spells Euclid, E-U-L-I-D, without the C. And I've always wondered about that. I pass that all the time, and it drives me nuts.
I don't know the answer to that one either. I'm on a roll. Who else has something? Kara wrote her master's thesis on Euclid Heights. She's the expert on that. She said she never noticed it.
I never noticed that it was spelled wrong. That's part of the Mayfield Heights allotment there.
Yeah.
I just yelled at everyone to talk in the microphone, and I'm not. This is part of what's the Mayfield Heights allotment right here, which I believe is what you're talking about.
Yes.
Euclid Heights Boulevard in Superior. West of Coventry is the Euclid Heights allotment. This side of Coventry, well, over there's the Forest Hill allotment. Over here's the Mayfield Heights allotment. There's a lot of little allotments here in Cleveland Heights.
Did everybody recognize the house on Cadwell in Euclid Heights? It's a big brown house, has multiple gigantic oak trees on it, and a well-built garage house.
Wilton, Euclid Heights. Marcus Brown house.
What?
Marcus Brown house.
That was his.
Right.
From the Brown allotment.
Well, the Mayfield Heights allotment, it's called.
Oh, it wasn't the Brown allotment.
No.
E.H. Brown. E.H. Brown owned the land, which was sold from a vineyard to the first Mayor Kane, on which our house was built.
Where your house is? Okay. Run 3 for 3 here, go on.
Well, I don't know if I
Ask me
should.
something easier, I give up.
Okay, I don't know if I should throw this in. It's not really a
Good.
question, but I just
Good.
wanted to throw it in because it's very relevant to Cleveland Heights.
Okay.
At one end of the dam, the end of the dam going up towards Coventry, there's an interesting obelisk with a great family history. It's the Brockwell family, and I'm not sure of the exact boundaries. I think roughly Cedar, Lee, and Coventry, and perhaps going as far as Fairmont, I'm not sure. But for 84 years, that area was the Brockway family farm from 1826 to 1910. Meadowbrook, which was an actual brook at the time, ran through the middle of it.
Oh, Brockway.
Yes, and Lorenzo and James Brockway are both buried there, and they're commemorated on there.
Right.
5 of their sons, all 5 of whom died in the Civil War, including 3 of whom died in some of the most notorious Confederate prisons, like Andersonville and Libby
Is that
Prison.
right?
That just wanted to throw that in because that is a connection to Cleveland Heights,
Yeah.
and a very interesting family that owned for 84 years an interesting part of Cleveland Heights.
Right, and the Brockway is buried right near Pryor, right on the point there that the Pryor and Ambler plots are in. Thank you. Yeah.
Is there a directory anywhere that would show where prominent Cleveland Heights residences can be found in the cemetery?
Can you repeat that question? Because
Is there a directory of prominent Cleveland Heights?
If you were to go to look for various prominent Cleveland Heights residents.
Not located, not that way. There's a directory of what are they called, Laura? Famous Clevelanders. No, but if you know names, you can go to the cemetery office and you can find them. But there's no specific directory of Cleveland Heights people that I know of. No. Okay. Thank you. I just stumble around. Lakeview's the only research project I've ever done where you literally stumble over things. Just, whoa, what do you have here? It's some tremendous thing, some real exciting discovery.
I think we should all thank you for a fabulous
Well, thank you very much.
lecture. You gave a lot of information out.
Okay, good, thanks.